how heterosexual couples have met data. That was just fire. Like, rest in peace, childhood friends.
Yeah. Dating apps are the main way now for a lot of
Your
people.
childhood friends literally just died. Like, obviously, this is taking heterosexual couples. So in 1940, it would have been existing couples, and then people just stopped marrying their childhood sweethearts. Probably
What
you
a
could look at it
future
as
we
like
live in.
due to the automobile and mass transit and people moving around more than
Yeah, I
ever
think it's
before.
like people don't stick around in the same neighborhoods that they grew up in, right? Everybody goes to university or a different school when they hit 18, shuffle
It's
Yeah.
around.
just like urbanization in general, right? Like there's
Yeah,
just like most people are spending like growing up in much bigger like population centers now than they were 50 years ago.
yeah.
Yeah, that's another good point.
It's just
So you
they're
don't
yeah.
have one school for the whole town that everyone goes to.
That everybody, yeah,
Like,
everybody knows.
Well,
live
and
in
it's
New
yeah,
York or
it's
LA.
there's a good chance you might go like from an elementary school with a bunch like XYZ student population to a high school, and you might not go to the same high school that a bunch of the people that were in your elementary school. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
true. All right, well, on that note, I guess we can just fire right into the podcast topic. So, if it's not too clear yet, we are going to be covering the topic of modern dating, just giving an overview of how the scene looks. I think Hubbard's, if you just want to kick us off kind of with the background, like historical context.
yeah, I guess more than dating, we're covering just
Dating, marriage,
yeah,
relationships.
dating, marriage, and
Intersexual relationships.
yeah, and to start, you kind of have to go back to hunter gatherers, obviously, as was our existence for tens or hundreds of thousands of years as humans, and to give a very brief summary of that period of time, human relationships, gender relationships were, I guess you'd call it like polygamy light or like moderate polygamy, where you had, because you had a lot of men dying young from violence, essentially, in many of these societies, you had more women than men, oftentimes in like in the age range that you'd get, partnered up. And then that would mean that you had some of the men at the top of the pyramid status hierarchy would have several wives. And then you'd have some men at the bottom that didn't have any partners sometimes. And it was kind of based on your ability to acquire status and resources, more or less. And
And you can still see that sort of distribution in modern hunter-gatherer tribes when they're studied.
yeah, and so you do have kind of like a chunk in the middle that would have like your typical monogamous setup of one partner, but and then even at the top it was, yeah, like you'd have two or three wives, and they'd be wives, like they'd be more or less like equal footing, um, full 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 partners, not like, as far as I know, not really like concubines or the same sort of like, you know, uh, disparity there where there's like all these second order
Yeah,
relationships.
they wouldn't be afforded the same status, whereas like these hunter gatherer wives would likely have
Probably
all the
depends a
same.
lot on the wives, really. Like,
Yeah,
you got a tiger mom in there, or whatever.
Yeah, that's true.
So then you fast forward to like I think the big change in the dynamic came along with agriculture, as with so many things in human society. You had, and there's various reasons. I don't think there's any like perfect evidence pointing to exactly why, but I think the big one is like the ability to store value, essentially, led to and just bigger human populations in general led to like greater wealth inequality, or like the first like durable wealth inequality, because you had like grain storage, which was like essentially equal to wealth. Grain was
Yeah.
wealth.
I think
And
I think a lot of people in the current context don't really understand grain storage, but because we don't really eat whole grains very often anymore, but properly stored whole grains can last for decades. So you could pass on a granary full of grains to your children, and then they could barter with that in the future. So you had intergenerational wealth being able to be passed on.
well, and you
In
just have like
grain.
within your own lifespan, you could actually like, become. You could become like a dominant player in society and own like a huge chunk of the society's wealth in the form of grain. Whereas like in hunter-gatherer societies, you more or less had perishable food items that could be maybe stored for a season, like meat if you dried it or whatever. And that's not, and because a lot of it was nomadic, you're not, you don't have long-term storage. You don't
Yeah,
have
you can't
long-term
access it
settlement.
like at any point in time.
You
Just
can't
when
bring
you're
it with you. So
you're passing through the region again.
you have like, yeah. And so finally, once you have the ability to store wealth and you have the, these big population centers with big wealth disparities, you had a like sharp increase in like, I guess, like the degree of polygamy practiced, where the very top of society, the kings and rulers would take like, I don't know, dozens or hundreds or in like extreme cases thousands of wives and partners, and then you'd have a big chunk of society just like absolutely wouldn't, like a big chunk of men, I guess, with absolutely zero partners. And that was like the dominant, I guess, form of society for several thousand years, until more or less Christianity seems to be like the turning point.
Well, I do
And
think before Christianity, there was trending towards a less polyamorous in a lot of the Mediterranean world, as far as I've read, but I haven't done deep research on it. But Christianity made like proper monogamy a thing for the first time.
yeah, I think you're right, and I think like part of that, like the hypothesis for like the rise of monogamy in general, because it's hard to explain, right? Like, why would the most powerful men in society who control all the resources and money, will willingly give up like their position as like these, their harems of hundreds of women? Like, why would they do that willingly? And the hypothesis, the best one I've seen, is essentially like intergroup competition. So group competition between various societies and various groups. Societies that were more skewed towards monogamy outcompeted societies that were more skewed towards polygamy, and the reason being like the mechanism action being that monogamous societies are more internally stable and they're more productive, because the more percentage, like a higher percentage of the men are willing to buy into the social norms and the pro-social behavior, because they're not basically disenfranchised by having no mating prospects.
Yeah, you're not
And
going to get a guy to do a lot of work if he has no ability to get a partner. He's just not going to do stuff, right? He'll just check out. And so if you lose enough guys like that, you'll actually just crush your productivity and your military. Like everything will start to sag, right?
well, and not well, and especially in antiquity, it's not like they would just drop out. They would just start pursuing high risk,
Yeah, it's
highly
true.
highly violent, usually, strategies to like get access to mates. So they would commit crime to try to make money, or commit sexual assaults or whatever. Like the men would not just drop out and play video games.
Yeah, they're not playing video games in their house.
They would go and cause internal strife, basically, which is like part of the internal stability piece there, where
Yeah.
monogamous societies have a bunch of men who are being pro-social and are encouraging pro-sociality because they actually have an investment in the society because they have a partner, right? So that's the hypothesis of why it moved towards monogamy. May or may not be the correct one in the end analysis, but what we do know is that in, I guess, yeah, the Mediterranean area, like Europe in general, kind of moved towards monogamy throughout the post-Christian era, and and then it finally started to be spread around the rest of the world in like the 1800s and 1900s. Just some like dates on that. Japan, 1880 was when polygamy was, I think, outlawed, and China was 1953, India was 1955, and Nepal was 1963. So, like, I mean, just between China and India, right? Like, that's a huge chunk of the world's population, and that wasn't until literally 70 years ago that there was some sort of legal framework of monogamy enforced. So that, go ahead.
Sorry, I was going to ask. Sorry, when was it outlawed in the States? Like, or was it always since the inception of the West?
I'm no expert, but as far as I know, polygamy was outlawed from like basically the foundation of the country based on English common law.
Yeah.
And,
Okay.
And
That's what
I
I
could be
assumed,
wrong, but because the Mormons were like, the Mormons were in like the mid 1800s.
yeah, they were pushing back against that.
Well, they wanted to make their own country.
Yeah.
That's probably a strong incentive.
And yes, so they were pushing against the state rule. Like they were, pushing for polygamy, but it was against this the law essentially, even at that time. So I'm pretty sure it goes back to the founding of the country. Anyway, like the summary there, I guess, is that for the last couple hundred years in the Western world, and for the last say 100 or so years in many parts of the world, with the exception of basically only like large population exceptions left are like the Muslim world essentially still allows polygamy by and large.
Although, as far as I know of the Muslim world, it's mostly limited to 4 wives in most denominations of Muslim or Islam.
Still pretty polygamous.
Oh no, it is polygamous, but it's not like
You're not building a 500 woman
way
harem.
more toned down, like much more similar to Mormons. Although I
Right.
don't think Mormons ever really hit that. They rarely hit 4 wives, but it's not like
Yes.
anybody's going out having a harem of 1,000 wives in this day and age that I have heard of.
Yeah, so again, aside from the Muslim world, you basically have monogamy as a institution, and that was like combined with marriage to create, I guess, and social norms around like not sleeping around and not cheating, all sorts of these social norms from that time basically created a somewhat stable dating landscape and like social script for gender relationships that lasted until like more or less the 1960s, which is when things started to really change dramatically, and now we're in a different place than we were then.
The one thing I'll throw in is that I think the solidification of monogamy in the Western world, or the apex of monogamy in the Western world, was really due to the Romantic movement. And I like this way of describing it that I saw, wherein love became a means of finding and validating oneself, of lending weight and texture and solidity to one's life. Because the Romantic movement was very interested in individualism and feeling and, deeper meaning and mysticism, that sort of idea. A pushback against the boring logic of the Enlightenment. And in many cases, monogamy before Romanticism would have been because the church told you could only have one wife, and monogamy after Romanticism would often be because you were looking for the one person that could complete you as an individual, and it was almost a quest in many ways to acquire true love.
Yeah, and I think like broadly it just worked, right? Like it wasn't perfect by any means, but I think the marriage and all that sort of stuff worked from a cultural stability point of view, right?
Yeah, I think good evidence is the fact that that model took over the whole world, basically, with a few exceptions of parts of the modern Muslim world. Like most people or most societies around the world have recognized like this was probably more of a useful way to structure our society and our relationships. Like, obviously, it's not completely, definitive proof, but I think it's a pretty good way to think about it. Especially since societies, they do compete, right? And it's kind of how, if one solution crops up as the winner or as the most dominant one, it's probably a good indication that it's stable.
Yeah, you can just think of it as like in terms of costs as well, right? Like if monogamy is likely to have a lower cost to society in terms of just productivity and stability and all those types of things, because if it had a higher cost than other systems, then those other systems would outcompete it as they'd be able to be more productive and stronger and more militarily sound as a result, et cetera, et cetera.
One pet theory I have, it has to do with the Ottoman Empire, because the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire had hundreds, up to over 1,000 in some cases, I believe, of women in his harem. But they weren't just any women; they were upper class women, because it was very prestigious to have your daughter in the Sultan's harem, and that takes a huge chunk out of your genetic pool of people who should be, having offspring, but they're now isolated, and only if the Sultan wants to be with them, which you physically can't be at the point of having 1,000. You can't have all of them pregnant. And so they're pulled out of the genetic pool effectively, but also they were guarded by other nobles who were castrated so that they couldn't do anything with the women. And those nobles were also in a position of honor. So you're pulling out a bunch of male genes out of the pool as well. It just does not sound like a smart thing to do with some of your best and brightest.
Yeah, that is a good way to start handicapping your genetic pool going forward. Well, Ottoman Empire is no longer here, so maybe we found the ultimate reason.
Yeah.
Do you guys want to just cover, I guess, some of the causes of what's changed in the last 50, 60 years in terms of social norms and that kind of thing that are now no longer in that same place?
Yeah, I think that's good segue.
Oh, I can throw in the first obvious thing. I think this gets like a lot of it gets attributed to political movements and social movements, when I think those are downstream of the ultimate explanation, which is technology. Like a lot of the social movements they'd been non-starters without the technology to facilitate them. And the most important one, I think, is like the birth control pill. Just allowed, finally, for the first time, women to control their reproduction and their biology. And that had just basically an uncountable number of downstream consequences that a society, like, I don't think is like really even started to scratch the surface in terms of like coming to terms with the various impacts of the birth control pill. And but definitely I think the birth control pill was a catalyst for like the social movements, like feminist movements and sexual liberation, that sort of thing that followed after. And none of that stuff would have made it anywhere without the birth control pill.
Yeah, I would also put in there like other time-saving devices for the home. Like if even if you have something like the birth control pill where women can control their reproductive fate, I think if they're still kind of confined to the house in terms of a lot of the work that they have to do with raising the kids, like even if you're going to have less kids because you're controlling the births a lot better, it's still likely that you're going to have at least a couple kids. And if you're still needing to do a whole like slew of different things around the house that take up half your day or more than half your day. So I think things like, I just don't think that they're I think it's other things on top of the birth control, though I think the birth control pill is the primary one. But I would say things like washing machines and dryers and all sorts of time-saving devices around the home also contributed to that, to allow them to get out of the house more as well.
I think that's true, but I think like the birth control pills, like what really made like the sexual revolution possible, because the only way that you can be sexually liberated with is to be biologically liberated from the consequences of sex. If you risk pregnancy every time you have sex, well, there's no sexual liberation, because it's just there's, and that like opens the door for casual sexual relationships for the first time ever, because then you can actually have sex without having the consequences of sex, so you can do it on the sly without there ever being like consequences that will come to like greatly bite you in the ass.
You get knocked up.
Well, I will put in that that's certainly the case for our cycle of history, because the Catholic Church was very against contraception, and nobody really trusted contraception until the birth control came around in order to do its job. But that in the ancient world, there were instances of decadent societies, such as Egypt, Greece, and Rome, where they had developed various forms of effective, not as effective as the pill, obviously, but effective birth control, such as using sponges inside the vagina or sewing condoms out of goat intestines. And then, of course, there's always the option of the old-fashioned coat hanger abortion, except they didn't have coat hangers, but, you know, the usual.
Other long, sharp, horrible instruments.
Yeah, like it had not picked up. Those forms of contraception were not that big in the Christian world, and the pill absolutely just changed the game. But there had been previous decadent societies that had a lot of casual sex.
Yeah, but even then, like the amount and just like ability, especially say you talk about like improvised abortions. Well, yeah, I don't even want to know what the death rate of that was.
Yeah,
it's not good. It's not good with modern technology. Improvised abortions, and like Jesus Christ, like I don't know how bad that would be with Roman medicine or Greek medicine. Just terrifying. So I'm sure there was like a degree, but it's on a whole new level. The amount of, I guess, freedom and opportunity for consequence-free sex after birth control pill. All that to say, I really do think like that facilitates like the later movements, which is like sexual liberation, right? Which is like all those movements that changed the norm so much wouldn't have been possible without that particular technological innovation.
Yeah, and then that like, women being sexually liberated then leads them to be able to enter the workplace and get educated. There's like a big cascade of impacts, right?
Yeah, I think it's hard to like summarize it all, because there's like so many things going on at the same time. But I think the simple way to summarize it is like post birth control. Then you get like the sexual revolution, and you get like the women's rights movements, which moves them into universities and the workplace. And basically the result of that, more or less, is like women's economic prospects were like wildly positive for like say the last 30 to 50 years. And for various other reasons, men's economic prospects in the Western world has actually declined over the last 30 to 50 years. So you kind of had like like a double whammy of women becoming more economically independent and more economically successful and better educated and all these types of things. At the same time, men going in the reverse direction, their real wages falling, their real hours work falling, their labor market participation declining, education declining, all these
Yeah, and a lot of that, like, for those who are wondering, like, a lot of that comes from the offshoring movement for companies where they start moving a lot of the manufacturing jobs that actually paid because they were unionized and relatively kind of tough on your body. They would pay pretty well. A lot of those got wiped out. So men are having to either like take lower paying, less successful jobs, or some, like, I think what we see right now is just really low labor participation overall.
There's lots of reasons that men did
Yeah.
poorly. I mean, one of them, quite frank, was just competing with women, right? Like,
Yeah, that's true.
It's just it's impossible to expect that if you just double the pool of labor, the labor supply doubles, that it's not going to have an impact on the pricing, right? So you would kind of expect there to be an equalization just from that, in terms of like men's wages declining slightly while women's go up as they're able to participate more, like, and kind of come to an equilibrium. But then, yeah, on top of what you mentioned, like outsourcing really hit male dominated jobs more, like manufacturing, because those are easier to outsource. Like a lot of the more like service orientated jobs are, which men and women are kind of more or less equally participating in, maybe with a slight edge to women participating. They're much harder to outsource because a lot of them are face to face kind of things where it's all about, personal interaction. And that also comes, that like combines with like automation and robots, which also hit physical labor jobs much harder than service industry jobs. And that was like a part of the premium that male labor enjoyed, was just like their more better physical prowess. Like, it just, so when there was less of a premium on physical jobs, men lost out a lot harder than women because they were dominating all the hard physical labor jobs that paid well.
Yeah, so it's a kind of a perfect storm of women going up in terms of their success and men going down. And then what that does is it creates a pretty big difference in the way in the dating market, right? I think there's a concept that some people might be familiar with, but it's called hypergamy, and it's the tendency for women to date across and up socioeconomic hierarchies. So they're not going to date guys. It's very rare for them to date guys who are lower education than them. They will, but typically that man has to actually earn quite a bit more than they do in order to overcome that education differential. But it's a very strong tendency. So if you have lots and lots of men who are now starting to do worse in overall like income and education attainment, like a good little statistic here is, I think it's 33% more women have bachelor degrees now in the States, which is, like that means that they're just on education level, there's going to be a lot smaller dating pool for the women. And so because of that hypergamy, what we have now is a lot of men and a lot of women who are not being able to find people who meets their criteria, right? They're not going to be attracted to those people, to like a big chunk of the market.
I think like one easy way to like think about that all is just in terms of talking about height, because it's just very easy to illustrate. Like if you talk to like most girls, they will want to date someone who's as tall or taller than them. Like, and that's, fairly uncontroversial, and
it's one of the human universals too. I believe it holds up across all cultures.
Yeah, I think that's true. So it's not that unreasonable that a woman wants to date someone who's as tall as them or taller. And basically, what we're describing in terms of the economic change that went on is if men and women all of a sudden kind of equalized in height, and then actually maybe women got a few inches taller than men on average, and then that would be it's kind of the similar situation of what's happening in the economic sphere, if that's what happened in the height sphere, because you just don't have nearly enough adequately tall men, essentially, in economic terms. They don't have the education and the income and whatnot to be attractive, and that's led to a bunch of issues that have been. I think that the other thing worth mentioning is this is also exacerbated by like technology as well, in terms of like social media and dating apps. I don't know if we want to go into that deeper at this point.
Oh, I think it's a good idea because that is a big part of the modern dating in general.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I think like in my mind, like the important takeaway from dating apps is they just like are facilitating this hypergamy situation perfectly, essentially. Like it's like the perfect tool for women to jump on in terms of living out the hypergamous desires, because they can go on and then they can literally filter by height, they can filter by education, they can filter by job type, and there's thousands and thousands and thousands of choices they can go through, and then they can set their criteria extremely high and only match with those handful of people that they deem meeting all their criteria, right?
And you see that borne out in the data too, because women, one of the studies I saw, they'll only like or swipe right for Tinder on 4% of the profiles. So like they're being extremely selective in terms of what guys they view as like acceptable, basically. Whereas men, it's 60%.
And that's also like the math there is even more, I guess, depressing or brutal, depending on how you see it, in terms of just the gender ratio on dating apps is something like 75-80% men versus 20-25% women. So women have more options and they're swiping on less of those. Men have less options and they're swiping on more of them. So it's even more skewed than it first appears if you assume 50-50
One of the other things that
ratio.
I think that I was thinking about when it came to these dating apps is I think a lot of women then get to see all of they get to kind of have their benchmark for the type of guy that they want raised, because if all you have is your personal network around you, and unless you're in an incredibly high-end network already, like just say you're an average woman, you're not going to have, I would say the average woman is not going to have examples of like extremely high-end individuals within their city. But if you have a dating app that you can then access all the guys basically who are on the dating app, or like a really good cross-section of the men in the city, I think women will then see it's like, oh, there's some extremely good looking, extremely successful guys. Like I've never met a guy like this, but that's who I want now. Like it resets their their bar, I think, quite a bit higher, and then it makes them even choosier, right? Because now they're realizing like, okay, there's some even better options out there than I ever would have guessed. I would guess that is one of the effects that these dating apps are having.
Yeah, I agree, and I'd just also add to that, like it expands the geography that you could date, right? Like if you're just going out to bars, you're probably not going to be driving 15 kilometers or 20 kilometers away from your house very often to go to a bar to meet people. Whereas now, again, if you're, you got a car, you can set your distance to whatever, 200 kilometers, whatever you want, and see tons of options, all like from a much larger geography than you would be if you're limited to meeting people in person naturally. And and when you travel, like, lots of people travel now, and if you travel to a new city, you might be previously it might be quite difficult for you to kind of feel comfortable meeting new people. You don't have any friends to introduce you into like a
Yeah, you
social
just got to
circle
go to a
meet
bar
people.
and hope it's a social one. Like,
Yeah,
willing
if
to
you're
open their
comfortable doing
cleats.
that, yeah, like if you're willing to just like kind of go out solo and go to a bar and meet people. Now you can go to a brand new city, and like within 15 minutes you can be swiping through, again, thousands of options of new people that you would have never seen before, right? So I think that's definitely a big part of just the equation of like opening up such a huge amount of competition.
I think that's a good
Which,
spot to throw in the changes in how couples meet historically, because that expansion of the pool or the distance has definitely been occurring, as we were discussing at the beginning of the podcast, I believe. It was occurring from the earliest recorded data that I found, which was 1940. And in 1940, about a third of all your relationships, 1/3 was childhood friends, the other third was family, and the other third was introduced through friends. And introduction through friends increased for about the next 40 years. And family and childhood friends introducing you to your partner decreased steadily from 1940 until today. Now, instead of 30% of people meeting that way, it's about 5%. And one of the things that did come up, starting in 1940 significantly, was the bars and restaurants, because it went from 10% in 1940 to about 20% in 1980. And then you look at today, and bars have actually increased again, all the way from 20% to about 27% of relationships begin in bars. Although that pales in comparison to meeting online, which is number one in 2017, which is 39% of relationships are now met online. And meeting through friends has finally dropped off beginning around the 2000s. And now it's only about 20% of relationships are facilitated through friends.
What about at work?
They actually didn't have at work in here. I guess it's, sorry, it's met through or as coworkers. So it's not as simple as just at work.
Yeah.
And through or as coworkers also peaked around 1980 at about 20%. And now it's down to about 10%.
Well, yeah, as coworkers, just going to get you fired.
Well, in North America, Europe is much more permissive.
Yeah.
But
I'm going to be one of the last of the stats on that one.
I don't think it will die out, because this has about 8 factors. A lot of them just not worth getting into, and none of them die out, but they'll hit 4
they're
or
just
5%,
they're just
like
slowly
meeting in church. Very rare these days, but it's still there.
Yeah, it is very interesting to see how it all switched, and like online dating is actually the number one now.
I think the interesting thing I noticed is that meeting in college was becoming quite popular, as many people are going to college, but then it got annihilated by online dating.
Yeah, it's all the kids are
college students are all using online dating to meet up now, so you don't have to hit up a chat in a lecture hall. You just go on your app, and now you have access to other people who are also looking for companionship.
And I'm sure that's like social clubs at colleges and stuff are suffering a lot. Like the participation in those things has gone down. And clubs and all that kind of thing have really like taken a hit in the last 20-30 years. And it's kind of like a spiral down, right? As the clubs become less and less.
It's a death spiral.
Populated. Less people want to go to them because they're less, likely to lead to a relationship or whatever, friendship, and then yeah, they just get worse and worse and death spiral for sure. Which probably unfortunate.
Yeah, I had a lot of fun in the clubs at university. They can be a great way to build skills and real friendships and whatnot. Like, it is pretty sad if they just start to die out. Though at my school, like, the clubs were just bumping, like they were super popular. But that could be, well, that was prior to
Well,
COVID, so you never know now.
and like with anything statistically, like there'll be schools where the clubs bump because they have a culture of clubs, but it'll be the
Yeah,
overall culture. They'll still be in decline.
that's true.
Well, I think there's probably something to be said about like I think it's a segment of people that may kind of quit the clubs. You know what I mean? Like it's you might still have like a reasonable club culture, but it's just there's a growing percentage that are just completely disconnected from that kind of experience. You know what I mean? Like maybe 20 or 30 years ago, you'd have like 90% of people would participate in some sort of club or activity, and now it's, you know, down to 80 or 75. So the clubs are still viable, but they are, substantially, there's a substantially larger portion of people that are just like totally out of it. I don't know if that's true, but I could definitely see that being true. Which actually does come to one statistic that's similar to that, which is this is from way back in the year of 2018.
The Dark Ages.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Dark Ages of 2018, which was a Washington Post article that I think got a lot of attention about sex and dating, because it showed in 2018 that Americans were having the least amount of sex they had ever had since, I think, basically they started recording it. And
Would have been around the 40s probably as well.
And the driving force of that was young people, which was, I think, kind of, a bit surprising to some people, right? Because I think there's a cultural narrative like, oh, those young kids and their, promiscuity and their casual sex and blah, blah, blah. But the young age group was like the most sexless group by substantial margin.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the stat that really got people like talking was there was a share of men and women between 18 and 30 reporting no sex in the past year, and for men that was up to 28%, and for women it was 18%, and it was just such a dramatic change because like back in 2008, so not that long ago, the percentage for both sexes was around 10%. So in a decade, it had nearly tripled for men, and it
Almost
nearly doubled
doubled.
for
Yeah,
women.
that is wild.
And so there was like a lot of talk about that, I think, when that research and stuff came out, and I think I wasn't able to find like recent 2022 data, but I think I did see some indication that number for men is over 30 now. It's over 30%. And with the COVID data probably coming out, it's because I couldn't find anything post COVID. It's probably even worse. It's probably in like the mid 30s at this point, which is very like just a crazy statistical increase in, I guess, 15 years now, right? From 2008, we're going to be looking at like triple or quadruple the number. And that, I think that goes back to the main kind of consequence that we were talking about with dating apps and hypergamy coming into full force, is that the dating market now is essentially top, say, 20% of guys or less that are dominating the dating market and getting most of this casual sex.
Yeah,
And
basically
then,
you can have your own little personal harem if you're one of those top guys. Like,
Return to monkey.
yeah. Well, like that's actually not that that's not that uncommon. Like, you know, within my friend group and whatnot, like that, you know, like the guys aren't like super successful, you know, not tech billionaires or multimillionaires or anything like that. But you know, it was not uncommon for some of the guys to be able to have like a multiple girls at once. They weren't dating any of them, but they were able to just kind of have multiple ones around, and then, you know, eventually select the one that they want and start dating that person like exclusively. That was pretty common.
well, that's a interesting stat coming that speaks to that is in the age group of 18 to 29-year-olds, 51% of men, but 32% of women report being single.
Yeah, that's.
So-
I saw that. I actually came across a couple of those things.
Funny
So
how that works.
yeah. There's a couple of these. That was one that I saw. Let's go find it here. Yeah, in unpartnered adults, this is a Pew research, so it was men. This is 20, percentage of adults 25 to 54 who are unpartnered. Men 39%, women 36%. And it used to be in 1990 when the Pew Research Center was collecting this data. From about 1990 to 2000, that stuck around 29%, exactly equal for both sexes. And then it started skewing, like heading up, starting in 2000. And then in about 2010, probably a little bit earlier, probably 2008 or so, it starts diverging. So it is interesting to see that, like, it, because they're saying when they say partner, that means like they're in a relationship, right? So they don't say whether or not it's like how committed that relationship is. Like, they don't have a strong definition for that, but
Well, and to be I think there's like two explanations that are playing into it. Women date older men generally, like usually date older. So obviously, when you age bracket stuff, you're gonna get a bit of a skewing towards women being more in a relationship because they're dating the older men that are in the next age group. Although that obviously can't, if all age groups are like that, which it seems that they are, they're basically by and large all the age groups are skewed in favor of women thinking that they're in a relationship and less men thinking they are. That's because there's obviously men who are in multiple relationships, which is consistent with what you were describing about your friend group, where, you know, they're dating, but they're not, you know, exclusive, and the girl might think they're exclusive, right? Or think that constitutes a relationship, where the man would say, no, we're not actually in a relationship. And that's common enough that there's a pretty huge disparity in the number of men and women that are in a relationship, consider themselves in a relationship in a given age group, which is pretty crazy that it's 51% to 32. It's massive.
Is that the lowest age group though? Because that would be the one where they don't have any. It would be the most skewed by the age bracketing.
Yeah, it would be. But even if that takes
crazy.
half of it, even if that takes up half the amount, like that's still like, you know.
Yeah.
There's some talks that are going to be had.
yeah.
Some tough conversations, some tough jumbotrons.
Chads make up only 5% of the population, yet they are in 30% of the relationships.
Basically, yeah.
That actually kind of like comes to I guess it would be like a video that I came across, and I thought it was rather interesting, whether or not it's true or even feasible. But a guy who does quite a bit of reading on this subject, he made a video just talking about how the future, like basically the future is polygamous, and he claims that it's going to be feminism that's going to push for polygamy pretty hard. just because feminism is about women's choice, and because you have that postmodern slant in the culture that all choices are equal, like there's no reason that polygamy isn't going to be because all choices are equal. There's going to be quite a few people who are going to take the easy route in terms of objectifying themselves for financial gain. You can see that just the sheer amount of OnlyFans and that type of activity, I guess you would call it. And so because men are doing worse and worse, you're going to wind up having very low options. And so he contends that feminism is going to kind of push they're going to push polygamy under the banner of polyamory and try to have it normalized, just so that they can then start dating unstigmatized, like the wealthy. He was saying that it's only going to be like a relatively small subset of women who want to do this, just because it's not it won't be that accepted overall. It's not 70% of women are going to start doing that, but he just was kind of making this as a prediction, and because we saw that polygamy is not actually very uncommon. It's very common throughout human history. And this guy makes that same point that, genetic contribution, kind of does show polygamy being common. And therefore there's no reason that we couldn't shift back to something like that, but I thought it was interesting whether or not it's going to be a reasonable thing. But I do think that there is some merit to it, because I was just posted this in the chat. It's you got the New Yorker putting up articles of polyamorous and polygamists are challenging family norms, and it's just this is one of the big exclusive high-end magazines writing about this shit. And it's also interesting because it's kind of focused around the guys having multiple wives. So it is kind of already in the cultural milieu.
Yeah, I think it's worth talking about the reason that you would see a change to the current status quo, I guess, or whatever you want to call what's going on right now. And I think the reason that we could see a shift towards that might be one consequence or one outcome is a shift towards polygamy in the future, or at least a push for it. Whether or not that push will be successful in terms of actually securing legal protections or whatever, I don't know. But I could definitely see an increase in at least lobbying efforts for sure.
Yeah, and just and the formations of these families in general, even if nothing comes of any sort of actual legal action, it's just more and more people because I already know some people who do this. They're not good friends of mine, but they're friends of friends who I know who have these types of relationships. I was it's rather interesting.
Well, and I think once you have the formation of these relationships, that's going to be the catalyst for those groups to then try to seek legal protection under the law with the ratification of a polygamous marriage act or whatever. And I think the reason you're seeing a move towards the formation of those relationships is because the current situation is not particularly happy landscape for anyone, really. You can divide the dating landscape up into, basically, on one side you have, like I was saying before, you have the successful men who meet that bar that women are looking for in terms of online dating apps and that kind of thing, meet the standards, and they have access to a lot of casual relationships and a lot of women. And you'd think, well, that's great for them, and some of them do obviously enjoy it and probably live that lifestyle, but it seems like it's not even that particularly fulfilling for them, because at the end of the day, I think a lot of them get disillusioned with like the whole, like the whole grind of it, of just like going on dates, and it's, the girls aren't, aren't in it for the long haul. They're, and the guys, they don't want to commit because they're not sure, and it just turns into
Always
this like
got to
very,
worry about whether or not you're going to get thrown into common law and lose all your shit.
I think it's just like a very hedonistic and kind of short term situation for those guys, and a lot of them do just kind of get sick of it all, right? Like it's like a party that goes on too long, and then
I had a professor who went through the sexual revolution, and he described it to me as a bunch of people looking for God in a pile of naked bodies, and they never found it, and then they had to move on with their lives.
That's exactly how I described when I went to like a big music festival. It was just a bunch of people looking for God with a bottle of MDMA. It's like, you're not finding it here, guys. Like, it's the same shit. It's free love, bro. Peace, love, unity, respect, bro.
yeah, well, that aside, clearly the remainder of the men that aren't in that successful 20 or so percent, they are either unpartnered and having no sex, like we discussed, maybe as much as 35% not having sex in the entire last year. And they're not happy because they're just, desperately competing for a very small number of women who are, willing to give them a chance. And then on the, on the women's side, it's like you have a lot of women who are getting dates and casual relationships with the men that they want, that they're attracted to, but those men aren't willing to commit to them because those men are, continuing to pursue other opportunities, right? Like they have so many opportunities.
An interesting stat for that, in that in 2019, 58% of singles on Match were looking for a marriage partner. And in 2022, 74% of singles on Match were looking for a marriage partner. So, as you're saying, it's going to be unlikely that you'll find a marriage partner in this sort of situation.
Well, and the problem is like the type of man that would be willing to marry them, they're not attracted to, right? So that the person that they're targeting, that they're actually attracted to, is not willing to settle down with them. And it seems like a very common scenario, right, is a woman will agree to a date with a very attractive, 10 out of 10 guy that's just, meets their standards in various ways. They go on a couple dates or whatever, they hook up, and then the guy moves on, and the woman thinks like, oh, that's the kind of guy that I could get and I could settle down with. Not fully realizing like that the guy was never interested in settling down with her in the first place, and that's just not like a realistic bar for her to set as like the guy that okay, this is my minimum requirement now for like
9 or 10 out of 10 type guy. And it's like, well, unless you're at that guy's level, it's like, good luck.
Well, and it's like, if 80%,
yeah, that's true. Because he's probably having fun doing other stuff. Like, he's just having fun, right? Like, even if you are at his level, he's probably just going to keep playing the field for a while.
Exactly. Like, if 80% of women are have like a casual encounter with a 10 out of 10 guy, like there's a tiny fraction of guys that meet that level, and 80% of women have had a casual relationship with one of them. There's just not enough guys to go around, and those guys are the least likely to settle down because they're enjoying the most success. So again, like basically no one is happy, I guess, is the final analysis. Is like it doesn't really work for anyone right now, it seems, because nobody's really getting what they want, and it's pretty miserable to slog around in that that world when the likelihood of you actually coming out of it with a relationship that you're happy with and that you want is low and continuing to get lower.
I think an interesting statistic that ties into that is because you kept referencing sex in the last year, or the lack thereof has spiked. But another thing that's spiking is full on virginity, where in America, and this is old data, this is 2008, so it's almost certainly gotten higher, but it's all I could find. It was 27% of 15 to 24-year-old men. So 27% of 24-year-old men had never had sexual contact, which was up from 22% in 2002. And 29% of women had never had sex, which was also up from 22% in 2002. And the weird thing in America, statistically, is that by 25, you have sex, because all of a sudden it goes to 2% of women and 3% of men that remain virgins between 25 and 44. But what you see in Japan, which is likely leading the trend, although it's not a guarantee that other countries will follow it, but the trend in other countries seems to be heading down the same path, is that in Japan, 25% of men between 18 and 39 were virgins. And that was 26. Oh, sorry, that was 25% of women and 26% of men between 18 and 39. So a quarter of your population by the age of 39 has never had sex. Although in Japan, they did not take into account same-sex, homosexual. So it would be a little bit lower than that.
I think you're reading it wrong because it's cross-sectional. So that's why you're getting like the disconnect at 25. So they're not saying like by 24, 27% of people are still virgins. They're saying that when they take a cross section of 15 to 24-year-olds at this point in time, 27% are. So presumably a large chunk of those 15, 16, 17-year-olds by the time they're 24 will have had sex. You know what I mean? It's just in a cross-sectional point in time. That's why there's that disconnect. So,
oh yeah, that's a good point. I was thinking of it wrong.
So the percentage of people that actually make it to 24 as virgins is probably pretty low, or
yeah, the instant like 24 age group would be a lot different than the bracket.
If you just took a cross section of 24-year-olds only, it's probably that would give you the number that you were thinking of, which is probably lower than 27% by a good margin.
Yeah, because like at 15-year-olds would be say 90% virgins, and 24-year-olds would be like 5% or whatever. Not 5, but something like that.
Yeah, it would definitely. But I think you're right in the sense like that was, you said 2008 data.
Yeah,
it's probably gotten a lot more skewed, right? Like in the direction of virginity, just given the data I was stating on the 2018 data that was just really bleak in terms of.
Brings up the philosophical question: is it better to have had sex than never get it again, or to have never had it at all? Facing many men.
Yeah, it is. Like, I just looking at all of that, it is like just a couple things pop out to me. It's like, one, pretty much like giga fucked on the kid side, and that's not good. Like population, we covered this in one of our other podcasts, but you lose your kids because you're not having them anymore. It's like your civilization dies. So for that, like, to me, that strikes me as a huge problem. One that's only getting worse as more and more data comes out. It seems like it's accelerating, or at least like carrying on in that same trend of less and less intimate relationships and marriage. One of the things that I'll kind of put that as is like divorce rates have gone down, at least in the States, over the last last few years, but the actual marriage rates have dropped off the face of the earth. Like they just tanked super hard. So like people were saying, oh, look at the divorce rates are coming down. It's like, well, that's only because just way less people are getting married entirely.
I was going to add to that, because we're looking at the relationship between sexes. One of the interesting things with not having kids at a high rate is that the amount of time spent on childcare has skyrocketed in most Western countries, for men and women. In most Western countries, men in 2012 were doing more childcare than women in 1960.
It's fucking
And
mental.
women were doing even, as much as double in 2012 what they were doing in 1960. Although France, bucking the trend, being France, somehow managed to have women doing less childcare and men barely doing any more. But almost every other country follows the same trend. So the investment of having children right now is incredible in terms of your time.
I think time and benefit too, right? I mean, not to get too off topic, but just the benefits of having kids when you live in a condo versus when you live on a farm. It's like free labor versus just, as Peter Zion puts it, expensive furniture.
But like, I don't think it's that off.
He has some of the best fucking quotes ever. I love it. Like, sorry, just to go off topic, but what Peter was talking about, he's like, well, yeah, the Biden administration basically took Trump's trade policy, stuck it through a grammar checker, and then put it into law. That was such a good quote, man. I wanted to give him credit for that.
I don't think it's even that off topic because it weaves right back in where if you're looking at the relationship and the dating market and why you get married, in many cases it was to have children and raise a family, but it's a totally different prospect if the goal of marriage is to just be with somebody and not have a kid, or even to only have one kid, not 6, because now all of a sudden you can have that one kid when you're both 30 rather than, well, if we're gonna have 6 kids, better start in the early 20s.
Yeah.
I agree. I think that people aren't so like intentional with a lot of those choices as you'd think. But
yeah, well, I'm not saying that this is what's running through their mind, but I think it's you pick up.
It's the
on
incentive
society.
structure that,
Yeah, I was gonna say.
that radiates into their, that percolates in their mind, kind of in the incentives and the cost benefit analysis that they implicitly do, for sure. I think going back to where things go is interesting. You were saying, Con, you're saying like polygamy might get a political push because people are already forming polyamorous bonds. I think that's true, but I do think that I think basically the current state of things is very unstable because everyone's just it's just not working for people, right?
Yeah, nobody knows what's going on.
Well, I think there's just other things that you can talk about that are coming out of the dating situation or like the gender relationship situation that are the result of like the breakdown of norms and institutions that govern these things. Like I think like a big chunk of Me Too is like the Me Too movement was basically the result of the situation as it is, where a lot of these women had sexual encounters, casual encounters that they later were disgusted by or regretted or felt shame about or just like straight up were guilty with themselves about, and then that like colors their interpretation of the situation, and then they make accusations to the man because the man's like the easy target, right, of like pinning it on him as the person to blame, like, oh yeah, like I'm guilty about this, I'm shameful about this, therefore I need someone to put this on, and you put it on the man. Like I think you see a ton of those cases with the Me Too movement, whereas like I think Aziz Ansariya, is that how you say his name? He's like the quintessential example to me where he basically the girl came out and like Me Too'd him, and her like basically thing was like he was awkward and weird and I had sex with him anyway and I didn't like it.
Yeah, it was just a bad date with the woman making
Tough times, like,
making a
That might
stupid
be worse
choice.
than going to prison, getting told that.
Yeah, to be fair, like pretty rough for him in terms of just like everyone knows like
Get-
you're just like a bad business. But yeah,
Bad
like,
date, bad sex.
she didn't bring up like anything like he forced me or he manipulated me or he anything. It was just like her
Just
literal
her
account of the thing was
bitching about a date.
he was awkward and weird, and I didn't like having sex with him because he was bad.
Yeah. That's so
like-
fucked.
And obviously there's a lot of like legitimate complaints rolled up in Me Too, but
Yeah.
again, some of those things too in like the Me Too.
Well,
situation.
what's his name? He was like, he was like some famous old school announcer. He had hugged a woman and he had put his hand, because she was really upset about something, and it was like his good friend and colleague, and he hugged her and he put his hand a little bit too low and he immediately like jerked back like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. Like, she's like, it's fine. And then he emailed her, I think the next day, or called her the next day, and was super upset. Like, I'm, very apologetic. Like, I can't believe, like, I just made a mistake. And then she's like, it's totally fine. Like, don't worry about it. And then she Me Too'd him, like, just jumped in on it. It's like,
And that's on him in a lot of ways. He should just let it slide. Hopefully she forgets about it and isn't absurd.
Well, even just like some of the legitimate complaints are just, you can still chalk them up to just like the current dating situation where, you have inexperienced men that don't really know how to initiate a, they're trying to emulate, say, like a top percentage guy and like be very smooth or whatever, and they just get overly, aggressive or whatever you want to call it, because it's like, yeah, like the attractive guys, like, oh, they have confidence and game, and they just go in aggressively, and they they're physical and whatever. Yeah, exactly. And it's like, yeah, it's because those guys are socially adept, and they can read consent from body language and et cetera, and then it's like some took a pickup artist course, some spastic that took a pickup artist course, like, goes out to the bar and then, like, grabs a chick's boob and is like, you want to go back to my place? It's like, well, yeah, you didn't quite get the content of the course there, buddy. I think you see a lot of that wrapped up in Me Too. It's just, yeah, basically misunderstandings and miscommunications and all stuff that are legitimate complaints and legitimate violations, but it's like the result of like
not this. Yeah, it's
the
not
intention behind a lot of the actions is reasonable. It's just poorly executed because there's
it's not done with like real malice.
Well,
It's just
another
idiots.
interesting thing I ran into is kind of the lack of sexual education, which I think is a problem there, because you're not teaching. I don't think anyone teaches it, but it should be taught. Basic human interaction in those sort of situations. But the average young adult has learned, like, when surveyed, they credit porn with teaching them about sex. It was like, this
Yeah,
is
that's
probably
terrible.
not a good state for the average young adult to be in.
Well,
Especially since they're the ones that are are supposed to be engaging in a bunch of promiscuous sex because they're young adults, although as we've seen they aren't. But
yeah, well, and that actually, bringing up porn, and that's another thing, like with men, where I think a part of the reason that you see a lot of the men that just can't get relationships just resort to pornography and video games and online, fantasy and escapism, because it's there and it's easy. So I do wonder about that in terms of, like, because the big negative consequence of polygamy is basically male violence, that kind of discussed it at the beginning, where these down and out guys that don't have much of a chance at a relationship will then take on high risk violent strategies to get a chance, and that destabilizes your society, causes crime and violence and social unrest. But it in this day and age, when virtual reality and sex robots and pornography and video games and all these kinds of things are, like,
chatbots.
yeah, like they're
Chatbot girlfriends.
AI and all this stuff is like kind of around the corner. I wonder if that would be a mitigating factor in terms of like just muting the response of these men that are essentially like the losers of the game, and they just decide like, oh yeah, like rather than
Burning shit down.
burning society down in front of me, like I'll just retreat into my virtual world and not really worry about it, which would mean that the political viability of polygamy might be higher in this day and age than at any human point at any point in human history. Because I think the only other option I see in terms of again return like moving on from this point, this unstable point in time, is there's going to be like a reassertion of like norms around monogamy, where basically reinvent monogamy, but from kind of a new starting place after everything got kind of knocked down and blown out. And they'll just, we'll have to, as a society, kind of like rebuild brick by brick the norms and institutions and rules and all that around monogamy. And I think that maybe we'll get a bit of both. I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's not going to be a one size fits all for everybody. I think there's probably going to be some groups that go one way, some groups that go another way, as there normally is.
No, I'm pretty sure the evangelical Christians are going hard on the polygamy. I can tell. I can feel it in my bones.
We live in clown world, in clown simulator, so you never know.
Yeah, you could definitely see like a niche kind of rise of a polyamorous culture that exists alongside a larger monogamous center. You know what I mean? Like where there's like a small shift towards polyamory, but it's just not a huge percentage of the population.
Yeah, because there's always going to be kind of smaller groups like that. There always has been. There always will be. I could see that getting bigger and to a point where it's like, people kind of know of it generally, but.
Well, the other thing worth mentioning, like we were talking about hypergamy and like the women going for dating up, across and up and stuff. The big problem, the bigger problem for women is that men literally don't care about your income and status as a woman. So like the high performing women that are like, PhD, masters, or, professional degree educated and make a bunch of money, they're actually probably going to be competing for men against women that have more desirable traits, such as being younger than them, with these super high status men, right? Because it's like men don't care that you have a PhD, men don't care that you make a bunch of money. Men are going to be looking for attractiveness and youth and these kinds of things, and
intelligence
therefore
is a pretty good one though, which is usually indicated by a high education, hopefully.
Yeah, there is like a bit of that, and there's also just the fact that I think you have social circles that are overlapping, so just like convenience factor helps those women, but it's like just an extra, I guess, thorn in their side in terms of them being able to pursue their preferable, their preferences, right? Like it's just for men that are really high performing. It's just not their preferred partner is not nearly as rare, I guess. And whereas
to use the exact same example with the genders flipped, once you're a PhD male, you can go into teaching and tale as old as time, hook up with a graduate student.
And then lose your job and be banned off a UBC campus.
Worth it.
It's just like the guy.
So,
it's like, yeah, I lost my entire career. Worth.
The first professor that I recall hearing about doing this was in the Middle Ages, and he got castrated for it. So losing your job's not that bad.
And some real trailblazers back in the day.
Yeah, just taking one for the boys. Jesus.
Like the future generations won't have to risk this.
They just
breaking
don't
the
know
norms.
what you do for love, you know?
Yeah. Do you guys have like other? I mean, there's such a huge topic that
Yeah,
it's
I think what we
possible
could
to.
kind of go over is just like, what about like just like the regular people who maybe are in this situation, like in the dating pool at the moment, and looking at this with horror, and maybe some people who might be out of it, but just kind of like for the regular guys and gals, like, do you have anything to say about that? Like, after looking at all of this.
Well, I'll tie in the last thing I wanted to add. I'll tie it into advice for regular guys. Reject the three-dimensional, return to the two-dimensional, even if it's on your screen and there's a three-dimensional person behind their screen and it's only fans. And you'll get that emotional validation from the e-girls that you just can't find in a real relationship. It's too difficult. Just don't even try. That's the future. I think e-girls are e-girls referring to girls that go on the internet and entertain men specifically, and you get a very strong parasocial relationship. I think that is enormously buoyed, if not in existence, solely because of the fact that so many men don't have relationships.
Oh, that was very helpful advice.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's what you should do. It works. That's why they're popular and make money.
Give up and spend all your money on simping.
Oh, no, I didn't say spend all your money. You want to be, floating in there, pay your subscription or whatever, but let the oil barons pay all the money, and, you get the content and they keep the streamer streaming.
Well,
Also,
I'm going to suggest that you do not take this advice because it's going to rot your fucking brain out, and you're probably going to shoot yourself at the end of a few years. Hubbard, you got any advice?
Well, it's just same price. That's dangerously close to socialism. Let sexual socialism. Let the big oil barons pay for it all, and
Exactly.
sneak in the back door on.
You just coast in on like minimum work.
Yes. I think it honestly it depends on like how old you are. Really, like if you're if you're currently young enough, then I think the advice I would give is like learn these things. Like I think a big problem for men and women is like they just don't have accurate understanding of how sexual dynamics work. And I think the big one for like a big part of it is the cultural narrative around like men and women being more or less the same, right? That's like part of like the blank slateism and stuff like that, where it's like, oh yeah, men and women pretty much the same in a lot of ways. Psychologically, they're not much different. Women like sex just as much as men, blah blah blah. And that, it's all bullshit. That's like pretty much all bullshit. And men and women have very different sexualities, and you should just learn that. You should, spend some time on actual decent quality evolutionary psychology and learning about like the differences between male and female sexuality and mating strategies and that kind of thing when you're young, because then you will be able to correctly like interpret the other gender's intentions and their incentives and your own incentives, and that information will at least give you a chance at getting what you want out of a relationship, and like not falling for incorrect mainstream narratives and stuff. Like like a great one being for men, like I think this is more applicable to men. Like there was a tons of like Disney type propaganda that essentially like the way you find love is you just wait for it. You just be yourself and then wait for it.
Oh, maybe not.
Yeah,
be
it's
yourself.
like the
But
one
best
fallacy.
The best one was that period in time in the early 2000s, what was coined the manic pixie dream girl. And it was just the guy going about his dreary life, and then the girl came into his life, and all of a sudden it became amazing and great, and he found himself. That's what all men want, and it's a complete fantasy.
Well, exactly, and it's like if you buy into like be yourself and wait for it to happen, it's never going to happen. And being
Yeah.
yourself is probably a bad idea because yourself, where you're starting from, is probably a dumpster fire, and
Yeah.
you should probably get your shit together and be someone better than yourself.
Yeah,
And then
one of the ways that you can just be better for yourself, like be a better version of yourself, is if you're a guy, women like muscles. It's one of the most attractive things. And it's not that difficult to get into the gym and not be fat and to add on some muscle. Like, it's not impossible.
The majority of people would disagree.
Well, that's because they're fucking being lazy about it. And that's what I'm saying. It's not like you're being asked to move the entire Himalayan mountain range by yourself. Like, yes, it's hard, and I do agree, Price. Like, that's why people don't do it. But it is not something that's impossible. Like, I used to be super fat and fucking useless, and just I eventually ground my way out of that. And it was a huge, because like I definitely would have been in that like chunk of guys who was just completely like hopeless and hapless, no idea how to get like into a relationship or exit a bad one, right? So like it takes work.
The way most people frame it and the way I used to think of it was, you have to force yourself to go to the gym and do hard stuff. And then one day I just thought of it, and it's like, nobody, like, it's entirely on you whether or not you want to be in shape. Like, it's just a choice. Like, do you want to be in shape? It's not force yourself to do this. It's like, man, it'd be nice to be in shape. Well, nobody's stopping you. Like, just do it. Like, it's not it doesn't have to be a big mental battle.
Well, yeah, you want to kind of turn it into just an automatic thing where it's like, yeah, every day at this time I just go to the gym. Like, that's just what I do. Every day I eat these foods and avoid these foods. That's just who I am. That's what I do. Like, there's lots of different materials out there. Like, if you're looking to improve yourself, like James Clear is great. Top Atomic Habits. There's a bunch of stuff.
Yeah, I don't think we should like dive too deeply into like
what you should be doing.
The self-help, because like, yeah, it's an endless maze of like a million different
we've got the one ticket that works for everybody, and they're gonna hear it from us.
Yeah. Beat Elon Musk and bang a bunch of chicks and get them all pregnant, so you're just like incredibly stressed out all the time and have way too much on your plate, and then easy. You'll just be motivated beyond belief because your life is intricate mess.
The spider web of relationships that are just insane.
Any one little,
One of your kid has disowned you and has changed her name because she hates you because she thinks you're a transphobe. But yeah, seems completely like a successful fucking family life.
I think like the advice in terms of like is also just understanding that the other gender has a completely different sexuality than you is like really important. And for like men, and especially like you see it a lot in like the incel community, where they don't understand like why women who could easily go out and like hook up like complain about like the dating market. They're like, oh well, you don't have anything, like there's nothing for you to complain about. You could just go get, you could go hook up tomorrow, or you could hook up in 15 minutes if you went on Tinder. It's like, yeah, except for women like don't see hooking up as a positive or a goal. They see,
unless they've become warped, like
no, but they because they only want to hook up with like a specific quality.
I have a good quote for that.
And so it's like, for them, it's like, yeah, they could go and hook up with an average dude in 15 minutes, but they don't want to. That's like literally not, it's not a positive for them. It's not a benefit for them. It's something, and on the reverse side, I think like women understanding that men's sexuality is just like so much more like hypersexual and like driven, and that like say for an incel, like I think a lot of women don't understand incels because they think like, oh well, it's like it's not hard for me to ignore sex if I can't get it, or if I can't get the type of sex I want. It's
like I'll survive it.
Yeah, it's like I think for a lot of
My
women,
brain
it's
won't
like it's
atrophy, and I won't turn into this weird goblin person in the dark of my room.
yeah, exactly. Like it's just it's for them. It's like it's not like some big yeah. It's like not some big point of suffering. It's like I can go a year without having a hookup or whatever. It's like not like why can't these guys just like get over it? And it's like well for male sexuality, it's just like it's this like constant
Your brain
drumbeat.
never shuts up about it. It's always in the back of your
Yeah,
head until you hit like your
it's
40s and your testosterone levels drop off.
so for these guys, it's like it's this thing that like drives them into like near insanity because it's like bugging them basically every minute of every hour of every day. It's just something that
Oh
comes
yeah.
into their head and they think about, and women just I don't think can relate to that very well. So I think it is useful just to get a solid understanding of like the science
Yeah, the
of
evolutionary background and how the opposite sex works.
I mean, I think here's also a good point for the pedants in the audience that we're always talking generally, and that you should not learn about women in general and then apply that mold inflexibly to every woman you meet.
Yeah, that is a
It
very
should be
good
a
point.
starting point, not a this is how women are point. It's knowing a general mold allows you to start from a more accurate position when constructing your analysis of the character.
Yeah, that's a very
it
good
just
point.
it gives you a framework to work with, right? And then interpret it. And yeah, obviously you're going to run into women who you can be like, oh, that's they're they're outside the norm of what you'd expect, right? And that's not that's going to happen often, right? There's tons of people that are you know serious distance away from the mean, right? So, but doesn't
Uh,
discount the usefulness of knowing the mean.
I found the quote. It was for one-time sexual offer of casual sex, the best predictor of whether or not women would accept such an offer was the perceived sexual prowess of the man.
Well, and for men, it's just basically a yes to
Yeah, I was
all
gonna
of them
say it's like
offers.
90%. Yeah, 90% yes.
Yeah, which is again, like a lot of men just can't fathom that a woman would have a conditional, uh, a condition to their encounters or a
Yeah,
condition to having sex is
the
because
way I
men
heard
don't.
it put is men need a reason not to have sex with a woman. Women need a reason to have sex with the guy. Like that's just how it works for them.
Yeah.
The
So
default mode, yeah, just opposite defaults basically.
I don't know. There's a lot of other advice out there, but I,
Yeah, I
I
think.
think
I
I
Well,
think
recommend not following any of it. Fuck them all. Too much advice out there.
too much
I
competition.
guess
We want to
I
be in the
guess you,
top 20%. We don't. We just want everybody else doing badly.
yeah. Again, I think if the person that's giving advice is not like tying it back to some sort of biological reality or framework, then you can probably
Throw
pretty
it out.
quickly move away because there's so much advice out there that I think if they're and so much of it is actually just in the opposite direction of true that again if they're not tying it back to I think evolutionary psychology, evolutionary biology, then they're probably running some sort of bullshit on you.
Yeah, I'd second that. All right. Is there anything else that you guys want to mention?
Well, I would mention, because I tried to focus on statistics, that really all you can find is population level data. And even then, a lot of that population level data is for college population, because obviously that's the easiest to study. And it would be very interesting and very difficult to study to see what the different subgroups within the population are like, because I think a lot of how people perceive the culture is driven by small subgroups within the culture, and so such that the norm is very different than what people think the culture is, because the people doing what people think the culture is are very small. Or in other words, the Chads and the Stacys are a small percentage. and most people aren't that. But because they're an influential small percentage, they set the tone for the whole culture.
Oh, that's a good point.
Yeah, I think I don't really have much else to say.
All right. Well then, thanks for listening. Peace.
Peace.
Peace.